Hey everybody, Brian Von VA here. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject that we want everybody to leave a comment about if you have an opinion, because we want to read them. This is all something near and dear to all of our hearts. Has Wizard of the Coast improved on D&D since taking over from TSR? It really depends. D&D and Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition were fairly simple, and created what can be best described as a framework rather than a system. It was more fleshed out than a system like GURPS, but was still fairly open-ended. To play an effective game of D&D or AD&D, you had to homebrew a lot. You died a ton, and progressing was ultra-marathon-like slog through years of storytelling. The closest modern comparison I could compare an original D&D campaign is a From Software game where get good was a significant factor in enjoyment and in success. 2nd edition released in 1989. Hey, that was my birth year. That was a bit of a mess though. They attempted to flesh things out more, added more complexity, and removed some of the requirement of homebrewing things, as well as sanitize some of the more controversial, at the time, aspects to the game. Most of the people I knew still played AD&D 1st edition well into the 90s and saw 2nd edition as an expansion rather than a new system. TSR kept pumping out more and more expansions, new rules and settings, and frankly, it just made a huge mess of things over time. You could easily spend hundreds of dollars just keeping up with releases and end up with a mess of books, conflicting rule sets, and incompatible settings. Eventually, people either clocked out of D&D or played very specific versions. Wizards of the Coast taking over and releasing 3rd edition was, to be kind, a disaster. I can't speak for everyone, mind you, but most of the players back in the day resisted anything resembling changes, with AD&D 1st edition treated as the Bible. Anything which dared to change things was considered heresy. The sprawl that came with 2nd edition had set the stage for this, as there really wasn't a unified way to play D&D anymore. The major redesigns and rewrites which 3rd edition brought went over like a lead balloon among this group, even as Wizards tried to fix the problems they inherited from TSR's over-publishing. The system was pretty flawed, as it tried to make too many compromises to get things back on track. Instead of stabilizing the player base, people left D&D in droves. Most people I knew mitigated to other systems from the mid-90s and early 2000s. World of Darkness and Star Wars RPGs were hot commodities back then, and Magic the Gathering seemed to suck all the air from the room for well over a decade, with D&D players often being seen as behind the times of rule-debating groups rather than role players. 3.5 was an acknowledgement of mistakes being made and an attempt to fix things. I would say that 3.5 was the first time I remembered pretty much everyone moving to the new standard. While there were still complaints, it was, at least among people I knew, a fairly well-built and balanced system, although one ripe for exploits which seemingly brought in more players. 3.5 made the game approachable, and while it was in many ways more complex, you could play it any way that you saw fit. While 3.5 didn't really fix a lot, it definitely stopped the bleeding and created a new foundation to go to after its former market share. 4th edition was in many ways a step backwards. It felt a lot like a return to the bad old days of the late days of the 2nd edition, where massive rule changes, conflicting editions, and making previous supplements incompatible. 4th edition was as divisive at the initial release of the 3rd edition, and was seen as a cash grab from Wizards. A few half-hearted attempts were made to fix 4th edition, though most players I knew considered 3.5 the last true version of D&D. Finally, we get to 5th edition. When 5th edition finally came out, and it felt like a well-needed return to the basics. It threw out almost everything that came with 4th edition and used a mix of the AD&D and 3.5 to build a refined version that would appeal to pretty much everyone. While I know some people who still actively play 1st and 2nd edition campaigns, almost everyone who plays D&D today has the core books for 5th edition. It's streamlined, you can easily port in 2nd edition supplements, and the rules are by and large consistent across all volumes and expansions. 5th edition has done what no other version did before it, simultaneously providing a new way forward for old school players while bringing in a bunch of new players. Now, the question, did Wizards improve D&D? Well, in my opinion, they certainly did, especially if you compare it to the complete mess 2nd edition had become in the end. It wasn't a straight line either, but I think the only time the D&D brand was in a better spot was the mid to late 80s before TSR started making big mistakes with the brand. Is it better now? It depends on who you ask. Personally, I like it better. There's faster progression, less PC death, more ability to run an epic campaign out of the box. But my opinion is far from universal. The most I can say is that if you're looking to get into a tabletop RPGs or tabletop games in general, you're likely to unfind a better entry point right now than D&D 5th edition, both in terms of learning curve and initial cost of investment. Has Wizards of the Coast improved the D&D game since the 80s? No, but wait. Let me explain. I have a lot to say here, okay? Hang on. I was there. For me, it was 1980 to 1981, and it was the summer between the 5th and 6th grade. I was 11 years old. I must have been about 2 years late to the D&D game, but the game was in full swing. Dungeons and Dragons was taking the world by storm. It was the new fad. I remember it came out on the news. The children were summoning demons playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm like, really? How? That sounds amazing. And there were demons. I was in the photography room after school. Richard Walker was the DM. He explained the players entering a stone-walled chamber where a demon was chained to the wall. There he was, horns and all. I remember the module was a lime green. The players gladly beat the demon with swords, maces, and magic missiles. Richard remarked, "Now it's my turn." He grabbed the dice, then he said, I forgot the demon was chained to the wall, so I can't attack back. The funny things you remember, you know? So, at this point, what I mean to say is, if a burglar had broken into the room just then in real life, I would have to have asked him, "What do you really want, man? Because I'm not leaving this game." I think I must have been fairly addicted by that point. Can you tell? So, about the original AD&D game, 1st edition, and about the mechanics, I have to say that today's 5th edition has somewhat taken the D&D game astray. But why, you ask? What's wrong with 5th edition in comparison to AD&D? I have experience playing AD&D from the 80s to 97, around 17 years straight actually, then leaving the game and coming back to D&D 5th edition in 2017, which was a 20-year hiatus. Looking back, I've probably had between 1,000 and 1,200 AD&D adventures. I really wasn't counting at the time, and I'm currently nearing around 100 5th edition adventures so far, now in my 4th year back. So let me tell you what I see here, okay? Things were much simpler back then. Back with AD&D 1st edition of 1980, things were really basic and easy when compared to 5th edition. For one, the player's handbook was a mere 128 pages. This meant your average kid or young adult could read it over a few times and get his sense of play. The DM's guide was a little bigger, 238 pages. Those two books totaled 368 pages. Fine. In contrast, the 5th edition player's handbook of 2014 is 320 pages. Yikes. Not only that, the print was smaller, and they seemed to have more print in each book, page for page. The 5th edition Dungeons Master Guide, also 320, 640 pages total, twice as much. It's not wrong, but it's much more difficult to learn to play. More rules, more to read. Okay, agreed? For example, back in the day, you had a magic user. They had a D4 for hit points, 1 to 4 per level. We couldn't use armor. We had a dagger or a staff. Basically, which we had to use when our spells ran out. There were no cantrips. There were no unlimited cantrips. We had one spell at 1st level. At the higher levels, we did get very many more spells. For example, at 28th level, if you ever got that high before meeting up with either a Sphere of Annihilation or a Demon Lord, Orcus, you would get 6 of each spell, 1st through 9th levels. That's 6 fireballs, 6 teleports, 6 time stops, etc., all in one day. Here, your wizard got nerfed. Our wizards got fewer spells at higher levels in 5th edition. And now our wizard. And all other characters of the 5th edition have lots of bonuses. Too many. Basically, you have bonuses on most stats. +2, +3, etc., advantaged, disadvantaged. Your wizard, or any class basically, gets new powers at every level achieved. More powers, more abilities. You have to pick a school of magic, 8 schools, and each of the 8 schools of magic gives different powers as they advance. Other classes choose a path too, Circle of the Moon for druids, etc. And if that wasn't enough, there are feats, backgrounds, multi-classing that basically exponentially add more and more powers and abilities to keep track of, to play your character. What this equates to is having to worry about more and more stuff, and that equates to slowing down the game and or installing a great learning curve to 5th edition, where there was none in 1st edition AD&D. Back in AD&D, there were few bonuses. You needed a stat of 16 or higher to get a bonus, like in Strength or Constitution. There was nothing at stat 12 or 14. More to keep track of now. More pages, more rules, more powers, more work. Back then, we had tables for everything. Check the table and see if you hit or miss. Make a saving throw or miss. Easy. More luck. More on the edge of your seat type playing. We had Thaco to hit armor class 0. It worked perfectly fine and easy. What else? There were no bonus actions. There were no reactions. Basically, you got one turn to cast a spell or attack. That was mainly it, and it worked. Now I understand over the years, a game can develop, of course. You can have more powers and more choices, blah, blah, blah. Fine. But this all becomes more difficult and harder to play, especially for the new player, and that part is bad. Saving throw tables, for example. Remember, I said things were much simpler back then, right? Take a look at the only saving throw table we used. It was the only one we needed. If you had a 15th level magic user wizard, and you were hit by petrification or a breath weapon, you'd just consult the table. It told you exactly what you needed to save, versus petrification, stone to flesh. You needed an 8. If you had a +1 ring of protection, you added that to our d20 roll. 14 + 1 = 5. You made it! You live! Nowadays, with 5th edition, we have to count our proficiency, stat modifiers, and then weigh that against the opponent's DC. As we can see, it takes many more new factors now to add everything up. Complicated. What Gary Gygax did is infuse the proficiency, stat modifier, and opponent's DC all into one saving throw table. Breath weapon had one power level, for example. The saving throw would differ only by class and by level. Petrification had a different power level versus spells. Mages were superior and versus breath weapon fighters were superior. See? Easy. Simple. It made sense. Death was only one roll away. Did I tell you that magic users only had 1 to 4 HP per level? Few players had constitution bonuses, so 1 to 4 HP means 10 to 40 HP at 10th level. 10 + 40 = 5 divided by 2 = 25 average hit points. A fireball did 10d6 at 10th level. That's 10 to 60. 10 + 60 = 70 divided by 2, 35 HP damage average. That would kill your magic user if you missed your saving throw. That's right, things were more deadly back then because hit points were fewer. You were closer to death's door. Oh, and there's more. After 11th level, magic users received only +1 HP per level. There were no more D4 HP. Fighters and clerics stopped getting hit dice after 9th level. Hit points were in short supply, my friend. So if you encountered a dragon, if you saw a Medusa or a Basilisk, or a Catoblepis, rolling up a new character was really only one roll away, and creeping closer each round. Oh, there were no death saving throws. Once you got to 0 hit points, you were dead. That's it. There was an optional rule to go to -10 hit points. I think it was in the Unearthed Arcana book. Not sure. And we did use this rule. So that gave us just a little breathing room. But it's nothing like today in 5th edition. In 5th edition, you basically pop up from dying by healing 1 hit point of damage. Like, wait, what? What's this meant is that when we played AD&D back in the day, we were mainly trying to not die. Nowadays, with 5th edition, death has completely gone away. The horror, the fear of dying in D&D has now been subdued. Back then, when the DM decided to attack us with the monster, we were hoping and praying he would not roll a nat 20. We held our breath in fear and in horror, but now there is little to fear. We get 3 saving throws. We get time to get our friends healed back up if they go down. Can you say rated G? I remember one time our thief fell off the wall and he died. I still laugh at that remembering back. We did have fun. We had lots of fun laughing. And there is another thing. Thieves, rogues, needed to quietly sneak behind a monster to gain a backstab attack and deal extra damage. In other words, you really had to work at that. And we did. Nowadays, you can deal sneak damage right in front of the monster's face. Where's the effort in that? Now let's talk about experience points. This one is a big one. If you just look at our magic user or your fighter experience tables, etc., we needed about 10 times the experience to advance each level higher. Serious. Can you say 3 million experience points? Oh, and we had cool titles per each level we advanced. And a higher level character meant that you were hardcore, blood, sweat, and tears. It took hundreds of adventures to advance to that coveted level. Archmage, 18th level magic user. You really had to earn that title. You really had to have the devotion and to use skillful play, otherwise you were toast. Die and re-roll a new character. That and luck, of course. You were lucky to live that long in the old days. Poison killed you. There was save or die poison. If you missed your save, you were dead. Nowadays, they just give you a level up after every adventure or two. 365,000 experience points lifts you right to 20th level. Easy, no blood, no sweat. It's like a rated G version of the original game. Hand it to your characters for free so they don't have to work for it. The players are rarely in danger of dying, and so how can they even appreciate it, right? All classes are now, get this, balanced. No one is stronger than anyone else. Everything is equal now. Socialism. I miss you, Gary. I really do miss you. And I miss my 6 time stops at 28th level. That said, I do not try to make my 5th edition D&D players earn it. We do not have the same skeleton-type mechanics where we made up our own rules. I loved this so much. That was called real player agency. Now there are so many more rules for everything that it leaves little to the player agency and even less to the imagination and to the creative spirit. Final thoughts. I do want to thank you, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, for Dungeons and Dragons. Thank you for the game that took me out of my mediocre childhood life and gave me a break from my grade school difficulties to allow me to throw dice and to imagine, to draw maps and build castles, to slam maces and cast spells, to beat up awesome monsters. All this as a boy grew into a man. I was a DM, a dungeon master. For that, I thank you. I do also want to thank Wizards of the Coast for saving D&D. Yes, that was a thing too. They bought the game and took it over back in 1999 when it was in a down cycle and in big trouble of going extinct. We had a resurrection of sorts recently since 5th edition came out. The game is back again. Celebrities are now playing D&D, and even girls are playing now. What? They did add new and interesting features after all. That they did. And for all that, I do credit them. All in all, after 4 new editions and 40 years of play, the game is still great. Harder? Yes. Better? No. Different? Yes. Still great? Yes. Playing the current 5th edition of D&D and looking all the way back to the beginning, the faith in the adventure and the heart of the imagination has not been diminished. I do want to say one thing really quick about his one comment in this. My uncle, who played AD&D and D&D 1st edition, he still has his character sheets for them, actually found the love of his life and his wife through AD&D. So, hey, it's out there, folks. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. What did you guys think of it today? What did everybody think? Leave it in the comments below. Let me know what you think that WotC did when they took over. Did they improve on D&D, or did they just kind of mind-numbingly melt it down into nothingness? That said, leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, of course, so you get posted whenever we make a brand new video. And of course, all the love to everybody. Please stay safe, happy, and out there, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.